Hi, welcome to Katie Rants, the YouTube series where I make a video whenever I have something to rant about. And I'm going to talk today about a really great book that I finished recently, and it is called 1 Second After by William R. Forstchen. So I'm going to, right there. So with a lot of libraries being closed, or, even with libraries being open, just being difficult to kind of get out and about, and some people are nervous. This is a book that I was able to get digitally, which I really appreciated, via my library. So I didn't have to pay for it, but I was able to get it via my library. And I use the Libby app, Libby. But there's a lot of great sources for being able to get books right now, especially if your library is closed or you're just not comfortable going out right now, which, fair. So if you're in that situation and you need a good book to read, especially, this book is not just, oh, I need some summer reading, need to read for fun, or I'm bored. This book is not just a good book, but it is really an important book, especially for those of us who need to really cement in our heads this idea that our social structure and infrastructure that we depend on and rely on is so fragile. So this is not just a fun summer reading. This is actually not light reading or anything like that, but it is important reading. Or listening, because it's an audiobook as well. So listening also is valid here. But to understand that everything that we depend on could disappear. And I think in this time of COVID-19 and lockdowns and all of that, I think we're starting to wake up to that. I think more and more people are starting to realize how fragile our social order, how fragile our infrastructure truly is, especially when we're looking at potential supply chain problems and things like that. But this brings in a whole new possible threat that most people really have not given much thought to. And it presents it in a way, rather than being like an academic book where you're reading about the potential theoretical, what could happen if this happened to us. It's presented as a fictional story and a narrative, which I really appreciate because it really gives you a realistic, okay, what would it truly look like for the average American if we got hit by an EMP? So that's an electromagnetic pulse. And EMP, if you're not familiar with the concept, or if you've kind of heard of it but you don't really know, the basic idea is that it is a electromagnetic pulse. It's a pulse of electromagnetic radiation, or energy. I'm probably butchering that, but essentially what happens is, if it's strong enough, it can completely fry pretty much anything with a circuit. Okay, and there's exceptions here. There's ways that you can harden technology against an EMP, and that's one thing that he talks about in the book is things that are hardened, as in they're protected using different technologies to essentially secure it against an EMP. And also, older technology that doesn't rely on circuits, can also survive this. But pretty much anything with a circuit. So basically, if an EMP were to hit us on a countrywide scale, our power grid would be down. Just about anything that runs on electricity or uses computers would be down. So this is the big thing that he talks about in the book, and I'll kind of go into more detail about what kind of set the scene a little bit for you. But, when we're talking about an EMP, we're talking about the complete shutdown of anything technology related that we use. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's such a huge deal. We might think about, oh, well, we won't have our smartphones or our TVs. We can deal with that. It's not a power outage. Okay. This is not just a power outage, and I'm going to explain why. But, when we talk about an EMP, it's something that can be caused in a couple of different ways. The primary way is through a nuclear blast or nuclear explosion. And right now you're thinking, oh, well, like a bomb drops on, New York City, or a bomb drops on, some other major metropolitan area. Not exactly what we're talking about here. Now that can happen. That can be an issue. But what the author talks about in this book is the possibility, and this is something, so here's the thing, is the author is military. He is, and he's actually been in these briefings where they've talked about this as a possibility. He's read these reports. So this is not just theory. This is not just crazy prepper conspiracy theory. This is something that our military and our government have studied and have concluded is a real threat and is a real thing that could happen to us, and we really would not have any warning. We really would have zero warning if this happened. And yet, there's been some decisions not to do much about it. And so I'll talk about those too. But what the kind of scenario that he sets for us in this book is a couple of, small yield. That doesn't have to be a high yield weapon. So a lot of times we think about nuclear weapons, we think about how big they are. And it's less about how big they are, and it's more about where they're placed. So instead of dropping it on a city or having a kind of ground-based attack in the middle of a city, what we're talking about is a weapon that goes up into the atmosphere, and actually the upper atmosphere, like really, really high up, practically in orbit, and then explodes there. Because then what happens is the electromagnetic pulse aspect of it. So the nuclear radiation is less of the concern here. We're not talking about nuclear radiation and having to protect yourself from fallout. What we're talking about is the electromagnetic pulse coming from this weapon and radiating out through the atmosphere, and the atmosphere essentially acts as an amplifier. Okay, it's like a dish that amplifies and spreads it out. So it's a much further reaching thing than if you had a localized nuclear weapon. And so what this does is essentially anything that is in line of sight from that weapon up in the atmosphere, which when you're up that high, there's a lot that's in line of sight. And anything in line of sight is fried. And so he talks about like 2 or 3 of these weapons over North America and potentially parts of Europe. Thinking about those countries, those groups that would like to see the Western Hemisphere essentially shut down, they would like to see Europe and the United States and maybe Canada and Mexico too, whatever, essentially shut down all of us. And how with a couple of well-placed, or strategically placed, I don't say well-placed, but strategically placed weapons could shut everything down. So what he talks about in the book, and just to kind of set the scene at the very beginning, not to give too much away, but he talks about is one of the first things that they notice, first of all, the power goes out, that's one thing. Power goes out, okay, fine. We deal with power outages all the time. It's really not something that freaks us out too much as long as it doesn't go on for very long. Power goes out for a few minutes, a couple hours even, and we're like, we can deal. Power goes out for a day or more, we start to get worried about our fridge and things like that. So the power outage isn't even what they really first notice, right? Because it's kind of the middle of the day, you don't really have a whole lot, lights on or anything anyway, you might not notice right away. It's the cars. So cars built, gas-powered cars built after 1980, and diesel-powered cars built after 1990, from my research anyway, are at the most risk. So that's the vast majority of the cars that are out there today out on the road, right? Most likely your car is built after 1980 or 1990, most likely your car is built after 2000. My own car and my husband's car are both post 1990. My husband's car is 99 and mine's 2005. But so both of our cars, even though they're older, we would consider them older cars, they're at risk too. They're fried because they have computers that do fuel injection. There's like a lot of stuff that makes the car run that is computer operated, right? Now some cars could be retrofitted. There's things that you could do if you're mechanically inclined and you know how to do this. There's things that you might be able to do to change that, right? But the majority of cars today, the vast majority of cars today, are sensitive to an EMP because they run on computer systems, and those circuits would be fried. So that's the first thing that the characters kind of notice, is that the cars just stop, and in some cases, on the highway, just turn off. And so you're trying to brake, you're trying to, safely steer off the road, they all just stop at the same time, right? All cars, all trucks, except for, again, those older cars and trucks that were built without those sensitive computer systems. So that becomes a major thing in the book, is that those people who have those older cars or can get their hands on those older cars, we'll talk about that too, um, that those people have the means of transportation where everybody else doesn't. And so that's a key thing. So that's the first thing that's kind of noticed. And just that alone, without necessarily all the other power outage stuff that we have, that alone is huge, because, and that's not just cars, it's also planes. So that's the next thing that kind of happens, and they don't necessarily notice this right away, like the main characters, because they're in a small town. This is the thing. So this book doesn't cover a major city, like New York City or Chicago or Dallas or Houston, or Los Angeles. This is a small town, or at least a small city. It's not like a tiny little town, but it's a small town. It's kind of rural. It's in the mountains. It's kind of this, quiet little place that you wouldn't think of, that wouldn't be a target necessarily. And that's the thing. These are the kind of places where people who live there feel like that they're safe, because they wouldn't be a target for a nuclear attack or a traditional terrorist attack, okay, or traditional, or typical, the kind of things that we expect. They wouldn't be a target. However, this is going to affect everybody. And so with cars and trucks shut down, and not only do you have cars and trucks shut down, but you have cars and trucks shut down in the middle of the highway. So even those cars and trucks that can run may have trouble getting through because things may be blocking, and there may be all kinds of obstructions. And so when you have that right away, you have a huge supply chain problem, because you've got cars, planes, trucks, everything stopped, and in most cases crashed, okay? And blocking roads, and planes that have crashed. And so you're going to have a huge problem with transporting food, medical supplies, and other things that we need, that we on a daily basis are trucking and flying all across the country. The food that we eat does not, for the most part, come from our local community. A lot of us try to eat local, a lot of us try to buy from local farms, but the millions of people, like I live in Austin, the millions of people in Austin cannot be sustained just by our local farmers. If every single person in Austin, if every single person in Dallas, in Houston, right, in New York City, tried to rely on local farms all at once, no, can't do it. Now, if we had a gradual process of people supporting local farmers and wanting to buy local and eat local, then what we would have is those local farmers would have the opportunity to expand their production. People who maybe weren't farmers but are interested in it would have the market opportunity. There'd be an opening in the market for them to start a farm. We would see an increase in local farmers. So we could make these changes. If we're thinking about them now, we're saying, hey, this could be a real issue. We could start making these changes, but if it happened all at once with no time to prepare, where those farmers don't know to plant extra, right? Or in some cases, they couldn't plant enough to feed everybody. With the land that they own, they would have to buy more land, and plant more, and they wouldn't be able to do that themselves. They would need a lot of help. They would need a lot of equipment that they maybe don't have. But if all of a sudden we're reliant on just what is in our immediate area, and essentially what is within walking distance or horse riding distance, that we're essentially dependent on either being on foot, being on a bicycle, riding a horse, something that doesn't require any kind of technology, any kind of vehicle as we would normally think of it, we got a real problem for those places. So these are just a couple of things that initially are a problem. Like just shutting down vehicles, we have the supply chain problem. We have a problem for food. We also have a problem with refrigeration and freezers. Those all go down, right? And so food that we may have stored up is going to go bad, right? And I'd love to maybe do another video where I talk about more of like, hey, what should you do if you're worried about an EMP? But I just want to talk about this book because it brought to my attention so many things that I hadn't considered. I'd looked at EMPs before. I'd looked at what could happen and what, and I thought about things like, okay, you need to have, you know, backups for, you need to be able to do stuff off grid. You need to be able to, I have a bug out bag that I can carry and be on foot if I had to be, if my car didn't work. But just the long-term consequences of an EMP, some of them I hadn't considered. And so that was really key to read about. So just a couple of more things about the book itself. So the main character, he is an ex-military, retired military, and he's a military history professor at the local college. He has 2 daughters. He has his mother-in-law, and his in-laws live nearby. And his wife died a few years ago from cancer. So it's kind of this, you have the setup of this family, right? That this kind of just fairly average family. But the distinction is that John, who's the main character, he is aware of EMPs. He has read these reports and he knows that they are a potential problem. He didn't necessarily think they would happen, but he's read them. And so when the initial thing happens, he's one of the first ones to figure it out. And so that really actually helps his town. And so even just knowing what it is can make a huge difference. And they kind of show that in the book. But some interesting things. So he has a teenage daughter, 16, I think she is, in the book. And then he has a younger daughter who is a type 1 diabetic. And that becomes a real key plot point because type 1 diabetics need insulin, and they need a lot of insulin. Versus, type 2 diabetics, especially adult type 2 diabetics, a lot of them can manage diabetes in some cases with diet, and reduce their insulin need, depending on their particular situation. A type 1 diabetic, if you don't have insulin, it's only a matter of time, right? And so that's a big thing, is not only being able to refrigerate insulin, but being able to get new shipments of insulin, for insulin to be created and delivered and, stored properly and all of that. So that becomes a real key issue for the main character, making sure that his daughter has her insulin. And then, there's just other issues in the town, like, that they don't have food stored up, that they don't have, that the town itself does not have a plan for what to do in this situation. So they kind of have to cobble something together, having to figure out how do we govern, how do we, how do we enforce laws, how do we prevent rioting and looting, and they do have some initial looting and that sort of thing. So it goes over a lot of these issues, and just is really important if you have that kind of prepping mindset that I talked about in a previous video. If you have that mindset, this is really an important book. And if you don't have that mindset, maybe this will give it to you. Maybe this will show you that mindset. The big thing about EMPs is that we have no warning, and there's no big explosion. Now, theoretically, if it happened in the middle of the night, you might see a little boop in the upper atmosphere, among the stars, if you've got a clear view of the sky. But there's not going to be a loud sound. There's not going to be a big boom. Right? There's no, like, everything has changed. The realization of what has happened is going to be gradual, and some people may never fully understand what had just happened because communications are down, all of that. And so, if it were to happen today, right now, you're sitting here watching this video, the first thing that you would see is the power go out. And you're going to be like, oh man, but here's what you need to watch for. Here's how you know the difference. And I'm just going to do this real quick before I leave y'all, and maybe make another video about EMPs specifically. What would happen in a normal power outage is the lights would go off. And if let's say you're watching TV, or let's say you've got this video up on your TV would go off. But your laptop shouldn't go off. Right? Unless your battery was dead, even if you're plugged in, it's like if the power goes off, your laptop should still be running because it's battery operated, right? Your phone should still be functional. You pick up your phone, and if it's dead, it won't turn on. You can't plug it in. You go, is my battery dead? What's up? So that would be the concept of, an EMP, is that not just the power would be out, but everything would be dead. And so that's what I really want to clarify there. And then my other quick note about this book before I end this video is that what I would tell people who are going to watch this or going to listen to this or read this book, personally, the information about what could happen was more important to me than the narration style or the writing style. If you're reading this book and you find yourself kind of bored in the first chapter, skip to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is when it actually all happens. So if you're like me and I'm like, okay, I just need to skip to the action, don't feel bad about skipping the first chapter, because most of the stuff that's in the first chapter will also be referenced throughout the rest of the book, and you'll be fine. So thank you guys for listening, and I will make another video about EMP sometime soon, and see y'all soon.